Hello, friends. Welcome back to New Community. This past week, I did my best to unpack Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 to 28. This is one of Jesus's iconic calls to discipleship, and entitled the sermon "Following Jesus," because I think Jesus essentially defines what it means to follow Him. And so we began with the question: what does it mean to follow Jesus? That might be a good question to start with, to take turns answering or giving your idea, your definition of what it means to follow Jesus. As we center ourselves and unify ourselves around the text, I hope that we all come to agree on Jesus' definition of what it means to follow Him. And I hope from my heart to yours that a prayer that would be on your heart, a longing to talk to your Lord, to pray to Him, would be something along this line: Lord, keep convincing me that following You is all surpassingly worth it. As we go deeper into what it means to follow Jesus according to His terms, it's good for us to keep praying till He calls us home. Lord, give me grace, give me strength, and convince me it's all surpassingly worth it. It will make me the happiest to keep following You to the very end, even as You welcome me home one day. So I organized the sermon into three big thoughts. The first big thought being the question: what is following Jesus? And so get into the text here, especially verse 24. But before you do that, help each other, remind each other of the context, review the context leading up to Jesus's classic definition of discipleship here. Specifically, discuss how the context of Peter and the disciples misconstruing the nature of Jesus's Christhood, His nature of being Christ, and kingship might help us understand Jesus' famous call to discipleship. And what I mean by that is this. Here's the hint. Think of the kind of king and kingdom the disciples were expecting of Jesus versus the kind of king Jesus knew He must be. If we understand what was going on in the disciples' mind and their misunderstanding of who Jesus was going to be, as Jesus put it in the passage 2 weeks ago, He contrasted that there's a way to think of the things of God versus the things of man. There was God's way of His Christ and how God would bring His kingdom versus man's way, or the disciples and especially Peter's way. Okay, so review that context, because I think it gives meaning and context to Jesus' call to discipleship that we're studying today. Now, Matthew, he uses the term disciples for those following Jesus, and disciple basically means student or learner. What ingredients of discipleship can you pick up from verse 24? One thing I love about Jesus, He was just a master of words. He had such an economy with words. I wish I could have more of His economy of words in my preaching. And He just powerfully, succinctly, perfectly defines discipleship in one verse, in verse 24. So what ingredients of discipleship can you pick up? Not only from the actual quote, what Jesus says, but even Matthew's leading up to that quote, the words, the part of the sentence leading up to Jesus talking. And in particular, what do you think Jesus means by deny Himself and take up His cross? Try answering this question in the context of the kind of disciple, or I think soldier, that Peter and the 12 wanted to be. Peter, I think, wanted to be a soldier. We especially see that in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus was arrested. Peter drew a sword and he was ready to fight and bear arms and bringing the kingdom that way. So try answering this question in the context of the kind of disciple that Peter and the 12 wanted to be in light of the kind of Christ they wanted Jesus to be, versus the corrective definition Jesus is providing of the kind of disciples he expects them to be based on the kind of Christ he actually is. Okay? Now, I offered the summary of discipleship, a definition, on Sunday, and hopefully this is a good reference point for you. A disciple of Jesus is a person who follows Jesus as Christ, meaning he's not just a moral teacher, he's not just a good person, he's not just some enlightened sage with a higher consciousness. No, he is the Christ, and we follow his words, his ways, and his will out of an overflow. We don't do it by our own strength, but out of an overflow of Jesus' grace in body and soul. Hope that's helpful. Now, the second big thought was the question, why is following Jesus hard? Why is following Jesus hard? Let's be honest and shed any self-righteous pretension or pretense. The call to deny ourselves and take up our cross is hard. Okay? It's hard. And it will be hard even for the most weathered and aged Christ follower. Most of the world is repulsed by this specific call. The whole notion of denying ourselves and taking up a cross is a hard notion. So put yourself in the disciples' sandals. Put yourself in the historical context of today's passage. How would you have literally and concretely interpreted Jesus' call to take up your own cross? How would they have perceived that, interpreted that, given the time that they were living in, being under Roman rule and the cross being what it was? Okay? How do you make sense of Christ's call to carry our own cross for your Christian life? Let's not just look to the cross as an emblem, a symbol of our own suffering and pain. It is that, but it is so much more. There's even more raw and in-our-face meaning to the cross, and Jesus asking us to take up our own cross. And why do you think the average human being does not warm up to Jesus' call in today's passage? Look, there are lots of people who will respect Jesus, be inspired by him, but they do not like this aspect, this part of Jesus' message and call. Okay? Finally, the third big thought was the question, why is following Jesus, nevertheless, all surpassingly worth it? Even though this call to discipleship is hard, why is following Jesus all surpassingly worth it? Why does following Jesus make us the happiest? So I encourage you to dig into verses 25 to 28 for this question. And I unpacked on Sunday and invite you to sort of revisit this act of Jesus forecasting, painting a picture of the future, of a great reckoning. But how is Jesus' forecast of this great reckoning a positive motivation for the Christ follower to keep following Jesus? How does it make it worth it for us? But also, there's another part to it. As we humbly admit that Christ's call to deny ourselves and take up our cross is hard, how does Jesus's "and follow me," emphasis me, provide the deepest comfort for the Christ follower? Look back on the passage from the beginning, verse 24, and comb through to the end, and notice all of Jesus's me's and for my sakes. How does being Jesus-centered, Jesus abiding, become our power to deny ourselves and take up our cross? The lights just went off. in my office. I don't know why. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that you are convinced all the more deeply, that following Jesus is all surpassingly worth it. God bless you. Bye.